You know, when you're about to dive into a new piece of literature in class, you're about to read a poem or a story or a book, and before you do that, your English teacher always says, let's learn about the author. Let's read a little bit about them. Well, they're doing that for a reason, and I'm glad that they're doing that. And we'll do that quite a bit in this class as well. When we learn about the author, we often also learn something about the text itself, because many authors take their own personal experiences and put them into the characters and plot lines of their stories. This idea lends itself to the historical biographical lens. This lens has two parts: historical, the time period the text was written, and biographical, how the author's life is a direct reflection in the text. Let's look at a couple examples before we fully define this lens. You may recognize this author, Edgar Allan Poe. He wrote a lot of creepy things like The Raven and The Telltale Heart, Cask of Amontillado, and The Mask of the Red Death. And he really liked writing really dark, creepy things. Well, if we take a look at his life, one thing that you may know about him is that he actually married his 13-year-old cousin. Now, this wasn't strange when they got married. In fact, people were encouraged to marry their relatives, and they were encouraged to get married quite young. People didn't live as long back then. But this is strange to us today, of course. Now, tragically, his wife died when she was very young. They were only married for a couple of years, and she became quite ill and died. And if we look at a lot of Edgar Allan Poe's poetry, not necessarily his short stories, but his poetry features a lot of beautiful young dead women. So now we can consider that all this poetry is written perhaps about his wife slash cousin who had passed away, and he's using this maybe as catharsis, a way to get these emotions out. Maybe you remember the poem The Raven, and there was a character named Lenore, this long lost love who had passed away. He has a famous poem called Annabel Lee, where he writes about this beautiful young dead woman, and he's probably reflecting on his life. That's using that historical biographical lens. We assume that the author used their life and their experiences and puts that into the text. Let's take a look at the historical part and consider time period. The time that a text was written, or the year or date it was written, also matters to the story. Now, Hunger Games is obviously a futuristic novel, but the first book was published in 2008. If you think about what was going on in 2008, well, we were in the middle of a recession. And think back to Katniss and her life in District 12. She's very impoverished. We have a lot of people out of work and hungry. Well, that could be a direct reflection of 2008. Even though it's set in the future, it still reflects the time period that it was written. Let's look at another biographical example. I'm sure that you've seen many Disney movies, and maybe you've wondered, why are all the moms in Disney movies dead? Sometimes it's the mom and the dad. Sometimes it's just the dad, but more often than not, it's just the mom who's dead. Take a look at all of these films, right? In Tarzan, of course, both of the parents die. In Nemo, we know it's the mother. I believe it's the mother and the father in Frozen as well. So we see a lot of dead parents, but a lot of dead mothers. Well, let me tell you a true story about Walt Disney's life. Walt Disney was becoming very successful in his career, and he decided to buy his parents a house. Now, he bought his parents this very nice house, but unfortunately, there was a gas leak in the house, and that gas leak ended up killing his mother. Perhaps in his storytelling, in all of these movies, Walt Disney put in this character of the dead mother because he felt that guilt. He was showing a reflection of his own life. Here's what happened to him, and he was taking that experience and that pain and putting it into his storytelling. Again, when we're looking at this lens, you could potentially just write it off and say, no, it's a coincidence. That's not what happened. But through this lens, we assume that the text is a direct reflection of the author's life and the historical time period. The short story that we read, Harrison Bergeron, was written by Kurt Vonnegut, and Kurt Vonnegut was actually bullied quite a bit when he was in school. Now let's think about the character of Harrison Bergeron. If you remember his physical description, he was supposed to be quite attractive, but they made him look clownish, right? He had a clown nose. He had shaved off, I forget, one or both of his eyebrows. He had to wear these awful huge glasses, and he had all this contraption, all this junk on him. Maybe Kurt Vonnegut was using his experience of feeling like that ugly duckling or feeling like everyone was looking at him and that he wasn't an attractive person and being made fun of. And he put that experience onto the character of Harrison Bergeron. So, to wrap up, this is a lens that considers how the text relates to when the text was written, the year it was published, and the author's life and experiences. I highlighted a note here that you have to do research to be able to use this lens. You might not know what happened in that author's life. So that's why your teachers generally provide you with a biography about the author before you start reading a text. The word biography means a life story. So whenever your teacher says, let's read a one-page biography, they're doing it for a reason. They want you to see the reflections of that author's life and experiences in the text. In terms of history, you might have to do some research, and sometimes that's just a quick Wikipedia search. What was happening in history at this time or in the geographical location that the text was written? That will be a really important thing to consider as you're looking at the reflections. So our two questions: how does the text reflect historical events from the time it was written? Like I said with Hunger Games, it might reflect that 2008 recession. How do the events reflect the author's life and experience? Did they go through something similar? Are they modeling a character after themselves? And then taking it to the next level, we might consider how those two ideas interact. Can we consider historical time period and the life of the author to really see a true picture of what's happening in the text?